The news broke like a thunderclap. Chief Babalola announces surprise heir, Dan named as son and shareholder. The internet did what it does best, explode. Twitter, X, was flooded with memes, Facebook anti-sprayed and gossiped in the same breath, and TikTok influencers staged dramatic reenactments of the cleaner's revenge. But inside the Babalola mansion in Banana Island, no one was laughing. Jimmy Babalola, the golden boy, shattered a glass against the dining room wall and stormed out of the family estate. His inheritance, his company, his reputation, all now being shared with a bastard he'd never met. His mother tried to calm him, but her voice cracked under the pressure. She was losing control of the narrative, and worst of all, her grip on her husband. Chief Babalola barely slept. He hadn't spoken to Jimmy since the announcement. Instead, he spent hours in his office watching videos of Dan, investor panels, interviews, and one particularly sharp TEDx talk titled, "What the Streets Taught Me About Power." In the video, Dan said, "Silence isn't weakness. It's a strategy. The loudest ones are usually the most afraid." It stung more than he'd admit. Across town, Mama Sarah sat in her cramped quarters, staring at the headline with trembling fingers. She hadn't spoken to her son in weeks. He hadn't told her about the DNA test, or the blackmail, or the press conference. She felt betrayed, not because he'd claimed what was his, but because he had done it without her. She was the one who scrubbed toilets so he could learn numbers. The one who washed uniforms while hiding secrets. And now, everyone was calling her son a genius, a disruptor, a rightful heir. But no one called her. Meanwhile, at Seritech, the office had tripled in size. Foreign investors lined up. Journalists begged for interviews. Anita, now head of strategy, organized a full PR campaign rebranding Dan as the tech royalty from the streets. But behind the scenes, she noticed something was off. Dan was getting reckless, accepting risky deals, making emotional decisions, canceling meetings without reason. One night, she confronted him. "You've won. But you're still playing like it's war." Dan looked at her, tired. "Because I'm not done." "Then what's left?" He turned slowly. "I want my mother to walk into that mansion in Banana Island, as the woman who raised the king." Anita's eyes softened. But Jimmy's were burning. He had just met with a family lawyer. And what he planned next would make Dan's scandal look like child's play. Jimmy Babalola was not just angry, he was strategic. All his life, he had been raised to believe he was the only heir. Every birthday, every boardroom visit, every magazine feature reinforced that narrative. And now, the same father who once called him the future of Nigeria had knelt before a stranger from the slums. No apology. No explanation. Just betrayal. But Jimmy had grown up in wealth, and wealth came with lawyers. His godfather was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless legal firms in the country. And it was there, in a glass-walled office overlooking the Third Mainland Bridge, that Jimmy discovered the weapon he needed. A clause in his father's estate agreement, buried in fine print and legal jargon. Any unacknowledged offspring not born within a legal union shall be subject to full paternity validation by a certified court, and any claim to inheritance may be challenged on grounds of reputational risk, illegitimacy, or public scandal. In short, if Jimmy could stir enough scandal, the court could throw out Dan's stake, or at the very least, freeze it. So he launched Operation Cleaner's Past. Private investigators were hired. Bribes were sent. Background checks were run on Mama Sarah. And it didn't take long to dig up what he needed. A disciplinary file showing she was once suspended for inappropriate relations with a superior. Rumors of a stillborn child before Dan. An unconfirmed report of a late-night arrest when she was 22, falsely accused of theft at a former employer's home. It was weak evidence, but scandal is about perception, not proof. Days later, blogs exploded with headlines. Mother of bastard heir accused of theft, sexual misconduct, is Seritek built on a lie. Mama Sarah saw it on her neighbor's phone. She sat down on the ground and wept like a widow. At Seritek, staff phones buzzed non-stop. Investors panicked. 2 partners froze their deals. And Anita stormed into Danny's office, slamming the blog article on his desk. "Tell me you were ready for this." Dan said nothing. His hands were clenched so tight his nails dug into his palm. Then, without saying a word, he stood, grabbed his jacket, and left. Not to his apartment. Not to the company. He went back, for the first time in months, to Beulah High School. To the janitor's closet where it all began. Mama Sarah was there. Alone. Sweeping. Their eyes met. "I didn't know they'd come for you," he whispered. "I knew they would," she replied. "That's why I stayed in the shadows. But you dragged me into the light, Dan. And now, we either stand tall together, or we burn." The janitor's closet was the same, cramped, musty, and dimly lit, but the energy between them was different. Danny stood tall now, shoulders broad with the weight of power, but his mother, she looked like she had aged 10 years in just 1 month. "I kept something from you," she said quietly, pulling a rusted tin box from under an old pile of uniforms. Inside was a stack of yellowed envelopes, wrapped in a faded scarf. Letters. All addressed to Chief Babalola. "I wrote him every year on your birthday. I never sent them. I didn't want to beg a man who used me and tossed me out like mop water." Dan unfolded one of the letters. It was dated 2 days after his 3rd birthday. "He looks just like you. I hate that. I hate how his laugh reminds me of yours. But I also love him more than I ever loved you. So I raise him. Alone. And one day, you'll see him and you'll know what you threw away." Dan's throat tightened. "Why didn't you fight back then?" Mama Sarah sat on the bench, hands trembling. "Because I was pregnant. Broke. And scared. And because I made a deal." She hesitated. "What deal?" She looked up at him, ashamed. "When the scandal started back in Beulah, Felicia, Babalola's wife, gave me 500,000 Nigerian nairas in cash and made me sign an agreement. I was young and stupid. The paper said I'd never make paternity claims in exchange for the money. I thought it was over. But that paper could bury us now." Danny froze. "Where is it?" "I burned my copy." "But Felicia." "She kept hers. That's probably what Jimmy is using now." He stood there, fist clenched, the puzzle pieces clicking together. They were never just trying to destroy him. They were building a legal wall around his legacy, brick by brick, scandal by scandal. Anita called. He picked up. "We've got a problem," she said. "One of the former Beulah board members just released a statement. He's claiming the school covered up the Babalola affair for years, and that your mother was paid to keep quiet. The media's going nuclear." Dan exhaled slowly. "Then it's time I gave them a different story." He hung up and looked at his mother. "You're not the villain in this. You're the proof." "Proof of what?" she whispered. "That even cleaners can raise kings. That silence doesn't mean shame. And that the truth, the ugly, sweaty, broom-in-hand truth, can still shake palaces." That night, Dan uploaded something the world wasn't ready for. Not documents. Not leaks. A documentary. Titled, "Raised in Silence, the Janitor Who Built a Billionaire." And within 24 hours, the internet broke again. Within hours of release, Raised in Silence shot to #1 trending on YouTube Nigeria. The 27-minute documentary, raw and unfiltered, opened with a shot of Mama Sarah in her uniform, mop in hand, standing silently in the janitor's closet. Then it cut to Dan, in a black hoodie, sitting against the chalkboard of his old classroom at Beulah High. His narration pierced the soul. You've heard stories about billionaires born with silver spoons. This is a story about a boy raised with a mop bucket. A story of betrayal, secrets, silence, and the woman who made me, even when the world tried to erase us both. It was emotional, brutal, beautifully edited, and damning. Dan didn't name names, but the evidence spoke louder than words. Old staff testimonies. Hidden audio clips. The video of Jimmy drunk at the fundraiser. The disciplinary document. Even a blurred screenshot of the hush agreement Felicia had forced Mama Sarah to sign. People cried. People raged. And people shared. Within 18 hours, the video had 5 million views and was trending globally under hashtags like hashtag raised in silence, hashtag cleaner to kin, and hashtag Babalola4. The fallout was nuclear. Corporate sponsors pulled out from Felicia Babalola's senatorial campaign. A protest broke out in front of Beulah High School, led by alumni demanding the school publicly honor Mama Sarah and apologize. 2 journalists leaked a new document, allegedly showing that the 500,000 Nigerian naira's payoff to Mama Sarah came from an account used for laundering campaign funds. The media painted Dan as a modern-day David, and the Babalolas as a family of corrupt, elitist Goliaths. At the Babalola mansion, chaos reigned. Felicia was pacing the living room in fury, phone to her ear. Shut it down. I don't care what it costs. I want every copy of that documentary off the internet. But even YouTube strikes couldn't keep up. It was already backed up on Telegram, Google Drive, TikTok snippets, and over 40 fan accounts. The story had escaped their control. Chief Babalola, sitting quietly by the window, finally broke his silence. He's smarter than I ever was, he muttered. Felicia turned to him, livid. You're admiring him. He just destroyed everything we built. No, he said, eyes far away. He's replacing it. And somewhere across town, in his now floodlit office, Dan stood by the window with Anita. He watched the numbers climb, the word buzz, and finally, he smiled. But Anita wasn't smiling. She held her phone in her hand, eyes frozen. What is it? Dan asked. She turned to him slowly. Jimmy just made a post. He's calling a press conference tomorrow. He says he has something to reveal about you. A pause. And it's big. The press conference was held at the Whitbaker Hotel in Ikoyi, elegant, exclusive, and crawling with journalists like vultures around a fresh carcass. The invitation was simple but chilling. Jimmy Babalola speaks. One truth. One name. One inheritance. Danny didn't attend in person. He watched the live stream from Seretech HQ, flanked by Anita, Mama Sarah, and 3 lawyers. The room was dead silent. Jimmy stood at the podium in an all-white agbada, face carefully composed but eyes full of malice. Flashbulbs lit the room like a crime scene. Then, he leaned into the mic. I have accepted that Dan Sarah is my half-brother. I've watched him manipulate public sympathy, claim the underdog role, and weaponize silence into a PR machine. But there's one thing he hasn't told you. He paused, letting the silence stretch. He is not legally eligible to inherit anything from the Babalola estate. The room gasped. Jimmy smiled. 16 years ago, my mother made sure of it. She didn't just pay his mother off, she had her sign over full parental custody. Permanently. Which, under Nigerian corporate law, disqualifies Dan Sarah from claiming paternal recognition without contesting the agreement in court. The crowd buzzed, confused. But that's not all. Jimmy pulled out a document and held it up. This is a sworn affidavit signed by a midwife in Ilorin, the woman who allegedly delivered Dan. She states under oath that no father was present at the birth, and that his mother insisted on leaving the father section of the form blank. Jimmy dropped the bomb with a smirk. Legally, he's a nobody. And if he tries to fight it in court, We are prepared to open a defamation lawsuit for damages exceeding 2 billion Nigerian nairas. Flashbulbs. Screams. Headlines drafted in real time. Dan sat motionless. Beside him, Anita cursed under her breath. They are flipping the script. Turning your origin into a lie. One of the lawyers murmured, he's trying to push you into a legal war you can't win emotionally. Mama Sarah stood, her face pale. That midwife, that's impossible. I delivered in Lagos General. Not Ilorin. Danny clenched his jaw. They forged it. But Jimmy wasn't done. He looked straight into the camera and delivered the final blow. And if you want more proof of who David Sarah really is, I leave you with this question: why did his mother change hospitals mid-labor, and who paid for that emergency procedure? I'll answer it at my next press conference, unless, of course, Dan withdraws all public claims by Friday. Back at Seretech, the room erupted into chaos. But Dan just stared at the screen, eyes locked, jaw tight. He wasn't just fighting for shares anymore. He was fighting for his name. The next 48 hours were a frenzy. The press dissected every word of Jimmy's statement. Blog sites held polls: who is the real Babalola heir? Family lawyers on TV analyzed legal loopholes. Even random baby witches on TikTok were drawing tarot cards to predict who would win the war. But inside Seretech HQ, silence reigned, not out of fear, but strategy. Because Mama Sarah had just whispered something that stopped everyone cold. I didn't change hospitals mid-labor, she said. I was forced. She sat at the center of the conference table, her eyes distant as she spoke. I went into labor at the school clinic. It was late. No one was around. I called Chief Babalola's personal line. He didn't answer. But 2 men showed up at the school gate less than an hour later. I thought they were taking me to a hospital, but they took me to a private building. What kind of building? Dan asked, his voice low. A bungalow. In Suralea. There was a nurse and an incubator, but no doctors. I was bleeding badly. I kept asking for help, but they just kept me sedated. I don't remember giving birth. I woke up, and you were in a plastic crib. She took a breath. The woman who helped me, the nurse, said I was lucky. That they almost transferred me to Ilorin because the madam wanted no records in Lagos. But the baby came too fast. Dan stood up so fast his chair screeched. They were going to erase me. Anita's voice trembled. That's why the affidavit from Ilorin exists. It's a fallback. A lie built to discredit you in case you ever came forward. Mama Sarah pulled something from her purse. A business card, old, smudged. I kept this. The nurse gave it to me and whispered, if they ever come for him, call me. I saw what they did. Her name was Iriti Akin. She was real. She knew everything. Anita grabbed her laptop. Let's find her. Within 2 hours, they tracked her to a modest chemist shop in Mao. She was older now, slower, but when Dan walked in, she froze, her hand covering her mouth. My God, she whispered. You look just like him. I knew this day would come. Iriti confessed everything. She had worked under a fake medical license for a wealthy family that trafficked women through shady maternity clinics to hide pregnancies. Felicia Babalola had paid her double to deliver Mama Sarah's baby off record and sedate her during labor. Iriti had documented it all in a diary, hidden away in fear for years. That diary included the real delivery location, the nurse who helped and died mysteriously a year later, a receipt with Felicia Babalola's initials authorizing the transfer of 1.2 million Nigerian nairas for discretion services. Dan scanned every page, hands shaking. This wasn't just scandal anymore. This was a crime. And with one post, just one, he could dismantle the Babalolas forever. But Mama Sarah stopped him. Before you use it, she said softly, you need to ask yourself. Are you trying to build a legacy, or burn one? Dan stood alone on the rooftop of the Ceretec building, wind howling around him as Lagos paused below. In his hand, a flash drive containing Nurse Iriti's full confession and the scanned diary pages. With one upload, he could expose the Babalolas for what they truly were: frauds, criminals, manipulators. But Mama Sarah's words echoed louder than the wind. Are you trying to build a legacy, or burn one? Revenge had carried him this far. Revenge gave him power. But now, at the summit of his success, he had to decide, would he become a leader, or remain a shadow warrior? Anita found him there. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, watching the city breathe. I've known you as a hacker, a genius, a son, a fighter, she said quietly. But I've never asked, what do you want most? Dan turned slowly. Justice. No. That's not true, she replied. You want validation. You want him to say you matter. That he made a mistake. That you are his son. Dan flinched. Because it was true. Anita placed her hand gently on his. Then force him to say it. But don't do it through destruction. Do it through power. Be the man they said you could never be, not the monster they expect you to become. That night, instead of uploading the files, Dan did something no one expected. He requested a live televised interview. Not as a victim. Not as the cleaner's son. But as the newest board member of Babalola Group and CEO of Ceretec. On Channels TV, with the nation watching, he sat across from a top journalist and told his story, not with scandal, but with strategy. He spoke about education inequality, generational silencing, and how Nigeria had a disease, not just of corruption, but of inheritance without merit. I don't need my father's apology, he said, staring directly into the camera. I don't even need his name. I've already built one. But I do need people to know this, that no child born in silence should remain in shadows. The cleaner raised a billionaire, and she's the only royalty I recognize. Mama Sarah watched from her tiny living room in tears. Twitter erupted. Brands flooded his inbox with sponsorships. Young Nigerians created the viral hashtag raised by queens. And the next morning, a document landed on his office desk. No envelope. No message. Just a signature. Chief Babalola had transferred 25% ownership of the family conglomerate to Danny. And written in pen beneath the signature, in shaky handwriting. You won. But God help us all if you ever find out what really happened to that nurse. Dan's blood ran cold. What nurse? Anita asked. He passed her the paper. And said only 2 words. Dig deeper. Anita didn't sleep that night. While Dan paced his office, she was elbows deep in browser tabs, medical records, and old newspaper clippings. There had been 2 nurses present the night Dan was born, Nurse Iriti, and one other woman, Nurse Miriam Uma, a licensed midwife with no known family. According to what Iriti remembered, Miriam had cut the cord, whispered he's perfect, and helped stabilize the bleeding. Then, months later, she vanished. Anita found her death notice in an obscure community bulletin from 10 years ago. Miriam Uma, found dead in her apartment. Ruled a suicide. No autopsy. No follow-up. Just silence. Damaji stared at the photo attached to the notice. The woman looked kind. Strong. Suicide, he muttered. Or silenced. Anita cross-referenced hospital staff records and found something even stranger. Miriam had applied for a job at Lagos General just a week before her death, and in her application, she listed Felicia Babalola as her former employer. That connection had never been made public. Anita gasped. She was about to expose them. Dan's jaw tightened. And they made sure she didn't. But the game had changed now. This wasn't just about family or legacy. This was murder. Anita traced the apartment where nurse Miriam had lived. It had since been converted into a brothel, but the landlord, an old man named Boba Sampson, remembered her. He leaned on his cane as he told Anita. She was a quiet woman, kept to herself. But 2 nights before she died, she got visitors. Big men. SUV. They argued. She screamed, "I will go to press." Then she disappeared. The next morning, her body was found hanging, with no note. No prints. No visitors recorded. Just silence. Dan took it all in. They hadn't just silenced his mother. They had erased a woman who tried to protect him. Anita placed a dusty cardboard box on his table. Inside it, Miriam's diary, rescued from her old neighbor who had kept it, just in case something ever came up. And what was inside was a bomb. A page with coded entries that matched the same payment dates as the hush money sent to Mama Sarah. Names. Amounts. Even Felicia's driver's phone number. A page dated 1 week before her death, reading. They said they'd ruin me if I talked. But I'm done being afraid. Tomorrow I go to the media. If I disappear, it's them. Dan stared at the last line. If I disappear, it's them. His hands trembled as he closed the diary. There was no more room for doubt. The Babalolas hadn't just buried truth. They buried a woman. And now, Dan wasn't just fighting for legacy. He was fighting for justice, and this time, there would be no mercy. The sun hadn't risen yet when Dan made the call. Not to the press. Not to lawyers. He called a detective. Specifically, ACP Mega John, head of Lagos State Special Crimes Division. A man feared for his bulldog-style investigations and famous for bringing down a former governor's money laundering ring. Dan handed over everything: Nurse Miriam's diary, the bank transfer records, Nurse Iriti's signed affidavit, and a 3-minute voice memo from Iriti herself, recorded just hours earlier, confirming she was told Madam didn't want the baby to live. ACP Mega said nothing for a long time. Then he simply replied, "You're about to burn giants, boy. Make sure you're flameproof." By noon, all hell broke loose. Breaking news: Senatorial candidate Felicia Babalola under investigation for suspicious death. Channels TV went live outside the Babalola mansion as plainclothes officers escorted Felicia into an unmarked vehicle. The family spokesperson tried to block cameras, but it was too late. Her face was captured, wide-eyed and angry, as she shouted, "This is a political setup. We buried that girl with dignity." Wait. Buried. The internet pounced. Within minutes, "We buried that girl" became a meme, a rallying cry, and a scandal headline all at once. Jimmy Babalola, furious and blindsided, released a panicked Instagram video claiming his mother was innocent and that Dan forged everything to destroy us. But it backfired. Public sympathy had long shifted, and now Jimmy looked like a privileged boy unraveling. But the worst was yet to come. That evening, ACP Mega arrested the Babalola family's former driver. Turns out, the old man had been quietly living in Delta State, long fired but never paid his pension. One visit from the police, and he broke down. He confessed to driving Madam Felicia to the Sorale clinic. He admitted she brought a special suitcase for the nurses. And worst of all, he confirmed that Miriam had begged for her life before they handled it. The video of his confession leaked. Twitter melted. Justice hashtags flooded the internet. Hashtag justice for Miriam. Hashtag the cleaner's son. Hashtag Felicia the fixer. Meanwhile, inside the now chaotic Babalola home, Chief Babalola sat alone in his study. His wife under arrest. His son disgraced. His empire hemorrhaging investors. He poured himself a drink and stared at the only thing on his desk, a copy of Dan's documentary DVD. He picked it up, sighed, and whispered, You won, boy. You really won. Back at Seretech, Dimeji stood before his team. Cameras surrounded him. The BBC had called. CNN Africa too. But he didn't talk about revenge. He talked about systems. About how young Nigerians were tired of silence. About how truth wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. Beside him, Mama Sarah held his hand. Her eyes shimmered with quiet pride. And just when it felt like everything had landed, Anita stepped into the room, phone in hand. You need to see this, she said, breathless. On her screen, a court document filed just minutes ago. Jimmy Babalola vs. Dan Sarah, emergency motion for inheritance suspension. The final blow. Jimmy wasn't done. The court date was set in less than 72 hours. Jimmy Babalola vs. Dan Sarah, a legal war for legitimacy, inheritance, and reputation. The courtroom buzzed with media crews, social justice activists, tech reporters, and curious elites. Outside, protesters held up signs like "Blood doesn't lie, justice for the cleaner," and "Sarah Babalola." Dan wore a simple black suit. Jimmy showed up in full Yoruba Agboda, flanked by his PR team and 2 bodyguards. He was still trying to play the crown prince, but the people weren't buying it anymore. Still, he had one thing left: the law. His team's strategy was ruthless: discredit the entire paternity line, claim the hush agreement was binding, and argue that Miriam's diary was hearsay. They even submitted a last-minute motion suggesting Danny's rise was built on defamation and public emotional manipulation. But Danny's team had come prepared. And Anita had one more card to play. As the judge reviewed both parties' submissions, Anita slipped Danny a folder. From an anonymous whistleblower. You'll want to read the last page. Inside was a transcript. A private voice recording of Jimmy, drunk, again, bragging at a high-end Abuja lounge weeks ago. You know this whole court case is just to frustrate him, right? I already know he's legit. DNA doesn't lie. But the more noise I make, the more people hesitate to trust him. That's how you kill a king, not with poison, but with doubt. When the judge asked if Danny had a final word before ruling, he stood and requested to play a short audio file. The courtroom went silent. Jimmy's voice echoed through the speakers. His arrogance. His strategy. His plan to use the court as a weapon. The judge's eyes narrowed. And just like that, the gavel dropped. This court finds that Dan Sharot is a rightful biological heir to Chief Babalola, and entitled to full public and legal recognition under succession law. Cheers exploded in the courtroom. Reporters sprinted outside to break the news. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all flooded with. Heir confirmed. The cleaner's son has won. Hashtag long live sword. Hashtag raised in silence. Outside, Jimmy disappeared into a black car, his dynasty crumbling behind him. But inside, Dan turned to the only person who mattered. He walked over to Mama Sarah, knelt before her, in front of every camera, and kissed her feet. Then he stood up, took the microphone, and said, I am no longer Dan Sarah. I am Dan Sarah Babalola, not because I need that name, but because I've earned the right to redefine what it means. But if you ask me who I truly am, I'll always be the son of a woman who mopped the floor with her pain and raised me in silence, until I roared. The crowd went wild. And that night, on the front page of Forbes Africa, the headline read, From the janitor's closet to the boardroom, how one boy changed a dynasty. And just like that, the truth stood taller than the mansion. From mopping floors in silence to shaping a legacy that shook the Nigerian elite, Sarah didn't just raise a billionaire, she raised a storm that swallowed corruption, power, and pride. Dan wasn't born into wealth, he was forged in pain, silence, and a mother's unbreakable love. The secrets they buried tried to destroy them. But in the end, the cleaner didn't just survive the empire, she became its crown. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. Never underestimate the quiet ones, they're usually raising legends. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping African folktales. Thanks for watching. See you in my next story.